Well, good afternoon and welcome to Whitworth's Spring President's Leadership Forum. Before long, we'll have 350 people in the room, and we're grateful that you are here. We consider these forums to be a gift to the Spokane community. Our intent is to contribute to the civic conversation about important matters for the region. In the fall, that was about the approaching elections, and today it is about education. So we're confident that these 90 minutes will deliver on that objective. This event is just one of the many ways in which Whitworth University contributes to the area. 40% of our graduates live and work in the Spokane region. Our alumni are executives, scientists, business owners, software engineers, teachers, pastors, community volunteers, and community servants. And in just a little bit less than 1 month, 600 of our undergraduate and graduate students will walk across the stage. They'll shake President Taylor's hand. They will receive their diploma, and we will send them into the world. And we know that behind every one of those graduates that we send into the world, there are years of support and investment by families and friends, and every one of those graduates has benefited from teachers who have poured themselves into the academic success of those students. And many of you in this room, in fact, contributed to that commencement day. So we want to thank you for how the Whitworth community is better because of you, for your presence here today. And we wanted to start today by showing you a slice of that commencement day. And now I'd like to bring forward Jill Pekka, Whitworth student, for our invocation. Jill is a junior at Whitworth. She's a Meade Panther. She's an elementary education major with mathematics and reading minors and an English language learner endorsement. She also excelled in soccer and softball. She was a co-captain on our soccer program. She's a co-president of our Student Athlete Advisory Council, and that is the group of student athlete leaders who serve as liaison between our athletic programs and the Whitworth administration. So Jill, if you would please.
Will you pray with me, please? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the beautiful weather outside, and thank you for this room full of people that care about education and about students' lives. And I just thank you so much for the panelists today, for Beck and Kathleen and Nina and Shelly and Jay. I just pray that you'll just bless this time today as we discuss important issues and topics about our education system. And I just thank you so much for your love for each and every one of us as individuals. And we really could not succeed in anything in life without you, Lord. And we just love you and pray that you'll just bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, events such as this are not possible except for the generous financial support of key sponsors. I'd like to take a moment to recognize them now. And so when I call your name, and I think I know where you all are, if you would stand so we could recognize you. Our title sponsor is U.S. Bank. They are our title sponsor for the past fall President's Leadership Forum. They will be our title sponsor for next fall's President's Leadership Forum. And we're joined by President Linda Elkin and a whole host of the U.S. Bank executive team. So thank you all for being here for your sponsorship. McKinstry, thank you. McKinstry, Dale Silla, the Director of Business Development. Dale, if you'd please stand and we could recognize you. Thank you, Dale. I believe Tim Stultz had to be a late absentee, but from Vandervert Construction, President Tim Stultz. From Sodexo, Jim O'Brien, the General Manager at Whitworth University. Thank you, Jim. And from Greater Spokane Incorporated, Maria Vandervert, Marketing and Communications Director. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize several other guests in attendance today, including former Whitworth trustees, Wanda Coles, Bill Curry. Bill's hiding there. Ray Lawton. And Carol Wendell. Thank you, Carol. We also have elected officials and civic leaders. Christine Johnson, Chancellor of Spokane Community Colleges. Dr. Johnson. Spokane City Council members. I see Nancy McLaughlin here today. And I believe if they're not here yet, soon to be Councilman Stuckert and Councilman Salvatore. And also want to recognize Mayor of Airway Heights, Patrick Rushing. Thank you for being here today as well. And then finally, I want to recognize from Whitworth staff, Rosetta Rhodes, the President's Chief of Staff, Michelle Drennan from the Institutional Advancement Office, and Maxine Lammers for all the work that went into making today possible. Thank you for all your work. And now, I'm going to introduce the panelists who will be up here after Dr. McCartney gives her address. So I will introduce the panelists now. I will introduce President Taylor, who will then come up and introduce Dr. McCartney. So, the panelists. Nina Auerbach has been the president and CEO of Thrive by 5, Washington since 2008. She is trained as a family and child therapist and has spent her career in nonprofit work in support of children and families. With a focus on those 2,000 days between birth and the start of kindergarten, the role of the organization is to focus attention on early learning priorities and effective research-based programs to provide leadership and to partner with experts and to create momentum by connecting local, state, early learning communities and driving investment in what works. Nina Auerbach. Shelley Redinger, Superintendent of Spokane Public Schools. She's completing her first year in Spokane. She's been a superintendent in 2 other locations, one in Virginia, one in Oregon. She was an elementary school principal. She was an elementary school teacher. She has also been an executive director of teaching and learning. And her role in leadership and curriculum and staff development is extensive. Dr. Redinger. And finally, Jay Rich joins us representing the Washington Student Achievement Council. This is a group appointed by the governor in which provides strategic planning, oversight, and advocacy to support increased student success and higher levels of educational attainment. Mr. Rich is an attorney in the Seattle area, and he is trained at Harvard Law School. Thank you for being here. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Whitworth's 18th president, Dr. Beck Taylor. He came to Whitworth after serving for 5 years as the dean of the Brock School of Business at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. Beck Taylor is a Baylor Bear, where he studied finance and economics. He then left there to pursue his Ph.D. in economics at Purdue University, and then spent a year as a visiting scholar after teaching at Baylor, spent a year as a visiting scholar at Harvard University. He has dozens of scholarly articles published, primarily with an emphasis on childhood poverty and educational readiness. Those have been published and cited in journals too numerous to cite for this occasion. So that's the curriculum vitae and a brief one of President Taylor. But to give you a better sense, in the educational community of Spokane, a better sense of our president, I asked three persons on the Whitworth campus, a staff member, a faculty member, and a student to provide me a quote about Beck's leadership on the Whitworth campus. They gave me a load of them, and I chose these 3. This professor said, Beck is a visionary who knows how to connect the big picture to the processes and people in order to make that vision a reality. The staff person said, Beck values and appreciates each of the people who work here and sees them as vital to carrying out our educational mission. He champions the inclusion of those who don't always get the limelight. And this student said, it's hard to express in words the amount of gratitude felt by students about Beck's leadership. He is a man of integrity who constantly challenges our community to think critically about its direction. It has been an incredible opportunity to learn from a man who partners his intellect, passion, and service for Whitworth. President Beck Taylor.
you, Scott. Thanks for that introduction and for all the work you did to make this event possible. Well, as Scott said, our President's Leadership Forum is an opportunity for Whitworth University to continue our history of service to the Spokane community. In important ways, Whitworth serves our community to provide venues and forums for experts and thought leaders from all over the world to come and engage us here in the Inland Northwest in important conversations that call us together as community and challenge us to think harder about who we are and who we want to be. Whitworth has long sought to engage our community in important conversation, hosting voices from multiple perspectives and leading civic and civil dialogue. We are confident that our time today will deliver on that objective. And so thank you for the many ways that you support Whitworth and our mission within this community and for being here today. Well, it is indeed my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's forum. I've known Dr. Kathleen Mccartney for nearly 15 years. We met when Kathy was a professor of psychology at the University of New Hampshire, where she was already a world-renowned scholar in child development. At the time, we were, the two of us, beginning to explore ways that economists like me and child developmental psychologists like Kathy could begin a rich collaboration to bridge the two disciplines for the sake of children who are at risk in our country and for policymakers who far too often feel ill-equipped to make a difference. 2 years later, Dr. McCartney helped to secure my appointment as a visiting scholar at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, where she had since moved to become the Gerald S. Lesser Professor in Early Childhood Development. And there, along with our colleague Eric Deering, we set out on an ambitious research track that over the next 10 years would simultaneously bridge the divide between economists and education scholars on the debilitating impacts of poverty on young children and inform policymakers to make better decisions. During the intervening years, while we were both still pursuing our shared research interests, Kathy was named Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I was simultaneously named Dean of Stanford University's Brock School of Business. So it was fun for us to enjoy our relationship on a new level when, as relatively inexperienced deans, we would share stories about leadership and innovation within our respective roles. Kathy's nearly 8-year tenure as Harvard's Dean of Education has been nothing short of remarkable, as she has spearheaded many groundbreaking programs and experiences for students. A graduate of Tufts and Yale Universities, Dr. McCartney is a Tufts trustee and represents Harvard on the founding board of edX, the online education consortium founded by Harvard and MIT. In her 7 years or 8 years as head of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the school has raised $165 million, including 2 $10 million gifts in support of pioneering programs that have brought the university's schools of business and government into partnership with the education school to prepare the next generation of education leaders. A central commitment of Dr. McCartney's administration has been extending the Harvard Graduate School of Education's external relationships in the United States and around the world. She has established a partner network of more than 30 school districts and nonprofit organizations, raised funds for international faculty research, and addressed education ministries and faculties in Chile, Thailand, and South Africa. Her work has been covered by the New York Times, CNN, and Education Week. Dr. McCartney is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Education, as well as the recipient of the Distinguished Contribution Award from the Society for Research in Child Development. She is a fellow of the American Education Research Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Psychological Society. And the Boston Globe named her one of the 30 most innovative people in Massachusetts in 2011. So it's not surprising then that for these reasons and many more, Dr. McCartney was selected in December to become the 11th president of Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. We have a proud alum in the audience. a role that she will begin on July the 1st. I'm excited that she and I will find even more excuses to now collaborate together as presidents on the many opportunities and challenges facing higher education. So it is now my pleasure to welcome my dear friend, Harvard Dean, and Smith's President-elect. Would you join me in welcoming Dr. Kathleen McCartney?
Well, thank you so much, Beck, for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and one of the reasons it's a pleasure to be here is that I told the Presidential Search Committee about Beck Taylor, so I feel really proud to have played a small role in bringing him here. And I wanted to come here and actually see him on campus so that I could picture him here in the years ahead, and what a beautiful campus it is. I'm very honored to be selected to be the speaker of this Presidential Leadership Forum, and I'm going to try to talk for about 30 minutes and provide some provocative things for us to talk about in the panel discussion. So I thought, Beck said, come up with a provocative title. So I did, Investing in Education Reforms That Work. And here's an outline of what I'm going to do. I'm going to share some statistics about the current state of public education with you, provide you a little bit of background on the education landscape. I'm going to talk about 4 things that I think do work, but probably those 4 things won't be enough to meet the needs of individual children across the United States. So I'm going to end by talking about what some of my colleagues in education think the futures of school reform are, because they have different visions of the future, and hopefully this will position us well for a good conversation. So as Beck said, I think if I spent the first 18 years of my career in 2 psychology departments, and although my work was applied in nature, it wasn't until I joined the School of Education that I became aware of just what some of the most pressing challenges facing public education are. So I just thought I'd give you some background. These are graduation rates for some of the largest cities in the United States, and one of the things that you'll see is that in places like Detroit, we only have 42% of young children graduating high school in the United States of America. I mean, this is the United States of America, not the third world. And even in some of our better cities, we're still only up at about 66%. So the national average is 73%, but certainly our urban districts are very challenged. This is the achievement gap by ethnicity. Really important for us to focus on this problem too. Again, one of the things you'll see, there's that high school graduation rate, much lower for American Indian children, for Black children, Latino children, and then of course white and Asian American children doing a little bit better. So how do we meet the needs of children as a function of diversity? And then finally, this statistic you might have seen in various newspaper outlets. There is a lot of attention, especially in the New York Times, to the fact that we don't look too good in international comparisons. So here we are, we rank 25th among OECD countries on an international assessment with respect to math, 17th in science. So what is it that countries like Korea, Finland, Switzerland, and others are doing? And can we learn something from that? Underperforming students, many of whom are poor, have lower earnings, poor health, and higher rates of incarceration. This costs us money, the economic equivalent of a permanent national recession. This is a quote from an op-ed that I wrote in CNN. The permanent national recession statistics comes from a study that McKinsey consultants did. And when you talk about education and equity, you can talk about it from an economic perspective, and I think it's important to do so by not investing in education the way I think we should. This costs us money. But of course, we should also be talking about it from a social justice perspective, and I suspect we'll do both. So what works? I want to just give you kind of a whirlwind tour towards 4 initiatives that I think are going to make a difference in public education going forward. The first has to do with teacher preparation, evaluation, and professional development. The second has to do with extended learning time, a longer school day, a longer school year. The third is early childhood education, which is a subject that I've spent my career on. And finally, I want to talk about human capital development and just one initiative at Harvard. So let's start with teacher preparation. I'm going to show you some data, but if you don't like statistics, don't worry. I'm just going to lead you through them and try to explain in English what they show. This first slide that I'm going to show you demonstrates that students benefit from high-quality instruction. It's a study that my colleague Tom Kane worked on along with several of his collaborators. So here you see a graph, and what we have on the x-axis is a change in percentile rank, how much the children learned in a given year, and on the y-axis we have the proportion of classrooms. So there are 4 normal distributions here that reflect teachers as a function of teacher quality, and the teacher quality is measured by student performance. And one of the things you see is that when students, here are students in classrooms with teachers in the top quartile, here are students with teachers in the bottom quartile, and much more significant gains if you have a good teacher than if you have a teacher who's not as effective. So what Tom decided to do on the basis of this was to try to figure out how can we measure teacher performance above and beyond student performance in the classroom, above and beyond test scores. So he basically talked the Gates Foundation into funding a very important study. And again, I'm guessing that many of you have read about the measures of effective teaching study. They've had several reports that have been covered by the New York Times, and the most recent one was only about 6 weeks ago. So you can measure teacher effectiveness by classroom observations. In order to do a good job, you have to measure multiple lessons. You have to have certified observers who know what they're looking for, and it needs to be subject specific. So you need to have math teachers observing math teachers. You can also ask students, and actually their responses correlate pretty well with test scores and with classroom observations. If you ask students, is this teacher supportive, is this teacher challenging, does this teacher maintain order in the classroom, measures like that are very highly associated with student performance. And of course, you can look at student achievement gains. That's what the last slide I showed you demonstrates. You can look at state assessments or supplemental tests because it's very important to assess how much children are learning in classrooms. I think Tom would tell you we need a balanced approach where we use all of these different things. And then we need to identify which teachers are effective, and we need to identify which teachers are not effective. The teachers who are not effective, we need to provide important professional development to make them better. And in some cases, we probably need to counsel some teachers out of the profession because they are just not good at it, because the education of our students really depends on having effective teachers. So Tom did this study where he randomly assigned 3,000 teachers to classrooms. The classroom rosters were fixed ahead of time. And in year 1, he measured effective teaching by the basis of gains in student test performance, and then looked to see could he predict how much students were going to learn based on how teachers did the year before. So it's a really, I'm sure Beck would tell you from an economic perspective, it's about the highest quality experiment I could imagine. So the principals created these rosters. The rosters were assigned randomly within grade and subject. The researchers predicted student outcomes based on the teacher's previous test results, observations, and student surveys. And then what the researchers did was compare their predictions to how well teachers did with how well the students did that year based on test scores. And I think you'll be surprised by just how good a job they did. Here are the data, and what you see here is predicted achievement by actual achievement. Each one of these dots represents 5% of the 3,000 teachers, so highly reliable estimates, and a pretty nice predictive curve. The slope of that curve is pretty high. And what this means is you really can't predict how your child is going to do in a given year based by how other children did the year before. So we're starting to develop measures of effective teaching that superintendents will be able to use in order to coach new teachers and hopefully to recruit. Probably seems like a pretty simple idea, right? Let's just spend more time teaching. It works, at least based on international comparisons. When we look at countries that perform well, they all have a longer school day, they all have a longer school year. We have a short school year because we used to be an agricultural society and children were needed to work in the fields. That's no longer the case. I think we need to be teaching more. So there is somebody in my state named Chris Gabrielli who once ran for governor. He would have been an education governor. We currently have a wonderful governor, Deval Patrick. He ran against Deval Patrick. And what Chris decided to do was to start a nonprofit dedicated towards promoting public policies to extend learning time. So they've done just a few studies that I think are illustrative of what can happen. I'm going to show you one as soon as I tell you a little bit about Chris's theory of change. You know, why have a longer school day and a longer school year? Well, the goal is to raise achievement, and it gives teachers more time to examine topics in greater depth, more project-based time, more small group instruction time. You can provide enrichment activities. Some people worry that No Child Left Behind led to well, not only teaching to the test, but less time for enrichment activities like subjects like robotics, astronomy, drama, more time for partnerships, community-based organizations with businesses, with higher ed, and so on. And finally, it gives teachers time to work together, to collaborate, to share curricula. There's lots of reasons why you might want a longer school day and a longer school year. So again, here are the preliminary data. I'm going to share what some of the acronyms are. These are Massachusetts children in Title I programs, all of them. Title I is for low-income kids. ELT stands for Extended Learning Time. So here are test scores in math. The red bar represents low growth across the year, the blue medium growth, and the green high growth. And one of the things you see is you see more growth in test scores when children have extended learning time with respect to math. You also see it with respect to English language arts. So again, I think we'll see more and better data over time, but I think these findings are very encouraging that this is something that might work. If you were to ask me what's one thing that every school should consider with respect to education reform, I would say they need to start early, and I have the data to back it up, both from Beck's and my work and from other people's work. This is a slide from Jim Heckman, the Nobel laureate economist at the University of Chicago. And what you see are, these are test scores, kind of school readiness, etc. This is the age of child. Here are the test scores of children in the lowest income quartile, second, third, and the highest income quartile. And this is what I want to draw your attention to. At age 6, the year of kindergarten, we see huge differences in how well children are doing. So you can't really attribute this to schooling. You can only attribute it to, because we've just started. It's the end of kindergarten. You can only really attribute this to the fact that there are huge inequities across income groups for our students beginning in kindergarten. We need to start earlier. It's just logical. This is also from Heckman. He's done a study showing if you were to invest $1 in children, where would you get the biggest return on investment? And it is during the preschool years. So you can invest in preschool programs, you can invest in schooling, and when children get older, you can invest in post-schooling job training programs and so on. You get the biggest bang for the buck in early childhood. In fact, for every dollar you invest, you save $4. Now, I had the privilege of working with a group of students in an education class at Whitworth today. I told them about this statistic, and I said, can you guess why that's the case? And they nailed it. They said, well, wouldn't it be the case that children would be that they would be less likely to be retained in a grade or placed in special education if they had early childhood education? You bet. They said, isn't it the case that kids would be more likely to graduate from high school, less likely to end up on welfare, more likely to be productive citizens? Yes, we have really good studies demonstrating that. And they said, and I was surprised they got this one, isn't it the case that they would be less likely to get involved in the juvenile justice system? It is. And that's why we save money. So we can pay now when they're little, or we can pay later. And it would be so much better for our society if we paid now. This is data from a study that Beck Taylor and I did, along with Eric Deering and Kristen Bubb. And again, if you're not statistically minded, let me just run you through it. This is a study of about 1,200 kids from 10 states across the United States. And at age 3, we looked at a test of school readiness as a function of family income, and we plotted the test scores of children who are in high-quality childcare, children who are in low-quality childcare, and children who are not in childcare at all. And because we're good researchers, we tried to control for everything we knew about their family background, except so how much money mom made and dad made, how much schooling mom and dad had, mother's PPVT IQ score. We controlled for everything we could come up with. And I want to call your attention to the poverty threshold. These are all kids in poverty right here. Kids who end up in higher quality childcare outperform children who are in lower quality childcare and children who are not in childcare at all. Now, Eric Deering did a follow-up study of this, and we have effects of quality childcare for poor kids through 5th grade. That's a long time. So one of the things that I think happens is that quality childcare sets the stage for school success. There are really 2 things that happen for young kids when they end up in and we're just talking about community-based childcare. We're not talking about, intervention programs, just regular old community-based childcare, but it happens to be pretty good. What happens to these kids is, for one thing, they're exposed to a verbally rich environment. People are talking to them. People are reading to them. There are learning centers. They have a peer group. They're interacting with peers. It's just a very cognitively stimulating place to be. And then they're also learning the soft skills, which we now know look to be almost as predictive as educational attainment as cognitive skills. They're learning how to sit in circle time. They're learning how to wait their turn. They're learning how to raise their hand, how to negotiate a hot topic with a peer, like when they both want a toy. All of these soft skills, this kind of social emotional learning, prepares them to be ready to learn once they get to kindergarten. I want to talk a little bit about education leadership, because we know that on average, that the best and the brightest do not go into the education sector. They go into business, law, and medicine. We know that. But what can we do to recruit more of the best and the brightest to enter this sector? And I say that as somebody who's devoted my career to it. Arnie Duncan, our education secretary, said, education today is inseparable from the development of human capital. And I think that's right. We're living at a point in history when young people are very interested in education. We know this because 10% of students at places like Harvard are applying to teach for America. That's astonishing. And even if those people don't stay in the education sector, they will have had enough experience so that when they pursue other careers, they can work hard supporting their communities so that they will invest in the kinds of education programs that work. At Princeton 3 years ago, they started a club called Students for Education Reform. There are now chapters of that club everywhere, including at Whitworth. I had breakfast with many of those students this morning, and they sent me home with one of those t-shirts that they made up, so I'm going to be really proud to wear that on campus and beyond. But we need to think about how to get more of the best and the brightest into education. Finland only accepts you into a teacher education program if you are in the top third of your class. Top third. They closed all the teaching colleges. You can only become a teacher if you go to one of the universities. Here in the United States, we know that on average, and there's lots of variability, but we do not have enough of the students from the top third of the distribution entering the teaching profession. It's more like the bottom 60%. So that's something that we need to turn our attention to, as well as turn our attention to how do we create pathways for people to become principals, superintendent, education policy analysts, commissioners for the 50 states, all of these leadership positions. So we did a study, a market research study with the Parthenon Group a while back. We interviewed lots and lots of people, and district leaders and non-district leaders alike. So non-district leaders would be like the people in the nonprofit, like Teach for America, New Leaders for New Schools, that kind of thing. They all told us that they couldn't find enough. They had openings, they couldn't find people to fill their positions. So you can see, 20 to 30% said it was a significant problem for them. But for district leaders, almost all of them said human capital was a huge problem for them. So one of the things that we decided to do was to create an education leadership program at Harvard in collaboration with the Kennedy School and the Business School. Beck alluded to that in his introduction of me. One of the joys of higher education leadership is the kind of institution building you're able to do. So I convinced my colleagues at the Business School and the Kennedy School to partner with us in delivering this new degree program. The first year, it's 3 years like a JD in law. You don't have to be a researcher and write a dissertation in order to be a superintendent, and I think Shelley and Nina would probably agree with me about that, right? We need to train education leaders differently. We need to give them the skill sets they need, and from the Kennedy School of Government, they're learning about politics and policy making, which is an important part of the superintendency. From the Business School, they're learning about strategy and leadership, and of course from the Ed School, they're learning a lot about education, we hope. So the first year we did this program, we had over 1,000 applications for 25 slots. The last 3 years we've had 500 applications for 25 positions, and we're just recruiting a different kind of student to our campus. It's really exciting. So we believe that the single most promising strategy for transforming American education is to recruit, develop, and place highly talented and skilled leaders in school systems and nonprofits and mission-based for-profits, in philanthropy like the Gates Foundation and government agencies. We're calling this the Fortune 300 jobs in education. What if we could get really talented people networked and working together? So we have this new doctorate in education leadership program. The first year, they're taking a bunch of core courses. The second year, they take courses at the 3 campuses. And then in the third year, they do a residency with a partner organization. So I thought I'd tell you about some of our partners. They're doing residencies in places like Chicago Public Schools, Denver Public Schools, Teach for America, Oakland Unified, New Schools Venture Fund, and the Department of Education in numerous states, including Iowa. They're on the job market now. The first cohort will graduate in May. I'm really excited about that, as you can imagine. One is going to KIPP to be the Chief People Officer. That has to do with recruiting human capital. One is going to the Khan Academy. He's going to be the Chief Innovation Officer. One is going to be in the Iowa Department of Education, kind of number 2 to the commissioner. And one of them is going to run an important project at Jobs for the Future called the Pathway to Prosperity Project. Again, that received a lot of attention from the business community, so you might have heard about it. We're hoping we'll have some superintendents before too long. A number of them are interviewing in districts right now. We're really excited about this program, and we hope that other colleges and universities will partner with us and offer this kind of training that young people are clearly craving for. Okay. The futures of school reform. Like I said, even if we had early childhood education, even if we had a longer school day, even if we had more effective teaching and better leadership, would that be enough? Well, that would be a lot, actually. But some of my colleagues are dreaming bigger and better. So I thought I'd give you an idea of 3 different futures outlined by my colleagues. Jal Mehta, did any of you see the New York Times op-ed last Saturday about, that was written by my colleague Jal Mehta. So here's a quote from him. Since a Nature at Risk sounded the alarm in 1983, we have seen a blitzkrieg of reforms. Now that's, what, 30 years of education, almost 40 years of education reform? Am I doing my math right? That's a long time. Okay. The standards movement hasn't fundamentally changed the performance of the system, right? Testing Kids isn't doing it. What Testing Kids has done, though, is help us realize the inequities in the education in public schools, and I think that's important. We now know how poorly poor children are doing. So that's good that we know that. We can't run from those statistics anymore. Some people thought paying teachers, performance pay would work. Gerald says it's a small idea. I don't think we have any evidence that that's worked. Charter schools, frankly, they don't look much different from public schools. They really don't, and several of my colleagues have done this kind of research. There are some very high-performing charter schools, and we love them. There are also some very high-performing public schools, and we love them equally. So I don't think charter schools is going to do it. Some of the challenges we face, I think, we have 15,000 school districts in this country. Some other countries have a Ministry of Education. It may be that we should think harder about what we want to do as a country rather than reinventing the wheel at each of these 16,000 school districts. I'm going to be really interested to hear what Shelley and Nina have to say about that. We don't have a strong knowledge base in education. We need to do better research so we know what works. I think when I talk to superintendents, they tell me they feel like they're guessing on things like bilingual education versus immersion because the knowledge base just isn't there, which literacy curricula to use, and so on. Teacher unions, I think we need some teacher contract reform so that we can be more experimental in our approach to education reform. We could obviously have an interesting conversation about that. We've already talked about the talent gap. And then we have a bunch of nonprofits and higher education institutions really operating in silos with fragmented efforts, and that makes it really hard to have any kind of success at scale. So I think there are a lot of things that challenge us, and this maybe gives us some ideas of what we could do. So some of my colleagues think we need to learn from abroad. I already told you where we rank internationally. So what are they doing abroad? Well, as I already mentioned, they are attracting, retaining, and developing talented people as educators, and they're doing a better job than we are doing. They're trying to help all schools improve their work through research-proven practices. So the variability among schools in Finland is actually very small compared with the variability among schools in the United States. One school in Finland doesn't tend to outperform another school in Finland to the extent that it does here. That's a problem. We need to develop leaders, as they have done. We need to set high expectations for all students, coupled with real efforts to keep students on track. And here I'm really talking about students from families with fewer economic resources. We need to care about those students, support them. And we need to connect secondary education to the economy and post-secondary education. Other countries do this pretty well. They figure out where the jobs are going to be, and they try to educate students so they will be educated for those jobs. And finally, we need to minimize disparities in outcomes by helping schools that face the greatest challenges in terms of student demographics. Again, we don't do that here. We mostly support schools through locally, property taxes, for example, and that means rich districts can offer more than poor districts can, again, on average. So this is kind of one future, learning from abroad and trying to take some of these policies and implement them here. The money should follow the students and not just go to the districts. In other words, competition is good, so here's one future. We should expand charters, offer vouchers, maybe include online learning. Parents could pay for online learning courses, for example, if money followed students. This would result in districts losing their geographic monopoly as primary providers. So again, I'm not advocating this, but some people think this is a good idea. States would regulate the market to ensure equity and transparency, right? There'd be some regulations, but it would be highly deregulated compared with what we have now. And there would be no state law regarding collective bargaining in schools run by independent providers. So this is a second future that some of my colleagues at the Ed School believe would work. The third future, I don't think I ever thought about until I read this book, which was just published. Let's unbundle schools from schooling. What does that even mean? Well, schools could function as general contractors and bring in different organizations that excel in teaching various subjects, right? Could be a company that offered math education, and we decide the best company is Company X, and we hire them in Spokane, we hire them in Cambridge. School districts or principals actually decide. So we're not hiring teachers, we're hiring companies. Wild, right? This would enable us perhaps to leverage new tools and new technologies, because again, it would be market driven. There would be some nonprofits, but probably some for-profits in this space. And it would enable specialized providers to meet individual student needs in a targeted way, right? Or at least that's the theory. So kind of an interesting idea to think about, would it make sense to unbundle schools and schoolings? Probably wouldn't want to do this statewide, but I'm going to be interested to see if some districts tinker with this the same way they've tinkered with charter schools. Will we start to see some schools experiment and parents enrolling their children by choice, and will it make a difference? So that's really what I wanted to say. I thought I would end with something inspirational from our president. You know, I really do believe that education is the civil rights issue of our time. I've been saying it for 8 years. And what our president said in one of his States of the Union that I just loved is that education is about something more, something greater. It's about the ability that lies within each of us to rise above any barrier, no matter how high, to pursue any dream, no matter how big, to fulfill our God-given potential. So maybe that's a good place for me to stop and make time for our panel discussion. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate your being here. Thank you. Thank you.